Hey guys, it's Eric with 360 Remodeling. We're bringing you another episode of Pro Tips sponsored by Buildega. Today we're going to be walking you through a step-by-step process of how to install this wood-looking tile. Looks like wood, but it's actually porcelain tile. So stick around and we'll show you how to do it. So we're going to break the floor installation into four major components: the site prep and demo, the floor prep, the installation, and the cleanup. So let's get started on the site prep. All right, so obviously the first thing we have to do is get all the furniture out of the way. Sometimes you have to get a little creative on this. You may be stacking stuff somewhere on top of something. Fortunately, we have a little room back here in this room where we can put the couches, the tables, and things like that. We'll put a few things out in the garage. The first thing we want to do is remove all the carpet and padding. The easiest way to do that is to cut it into 4-foot strips to make it lighter to carry out. If you're saving the carpet, skip this step. So the next thing we'll want to take out is the tack strip and the nails. This can be done with a simple hammer and pry bar, or if you have a chipping hammer laying around, it'll make the job a lot quicker. Now that we have the floor clean, we can see what we're working with. We've got to first determine how level or flat the floor is, and the best way to do that is to run a 8-foot level or a 10-foot metal straight edge across the floor. And the general rule of thumb, anything over an 1/8 inch rise or fall in the floor, you'll need to address that either by filling the low spot in or grinding the high spot down. The next thing we want to do is get the floor really clean. A lot of times you'll see this where there's glue, there's stain, there's paint on the concrete. If you took up old tile, you're going to have a lot of thin set to clean up. And you've got to get all that up before you lay any of the new tile down. Otherwise, the glue that you use isn't going to stick to the concrete, which is going to allow for hollow spots in your tile, and you don't want that with a new tile floor. So there's a big step in cleaning. You want to take your time on this, do a thorough job. Once you get everything scraped or ground down, you'll want to run the shop vac over the floor and vacuum up all the dust, and it never hurts to run a mop over it either to make sure we get all that dust up so that the glue will stick to the concrete. The next thing we want to look at is the cracks. I'm not going to get too specific on this on how to address them and how to fix them because it's very region specific and project specific. So I don't want to get too detailed. I will tell you that we used a liquid crack membrane on this floor. We used 2 coats of it just to help with any settling or shifting that may occur. It kind of prevents that. Now that we have all the tile laid out, the next thing we want to do is pop a chalk line. This is the most important line as we lay our first row of tile right up against it. So we want to spend some time and make sure that this line is really straight. What I usually do is measure equal distance off the longest wall and then pop the chalk line over the average of those distances. A lot of times the walls aren't going to be perfectly straight. They may bow in and out 1/4 of an inch. So you don't want to start laying your first row of tile right up against an imperfectly straight wall, and then by the time you get to the middle of the room, it looks like a snake when you look down the grout line. There's a lot of different choices when you're picking out thin set, so you want to look on the bag and make sure that you match the thin set to the tile that you'll be laying. Some are for interior, some are for exterior, some are for walls, some are for floors, some are for ceramic, some are for porcelain, some are for stone. So there's a lot of different choices, so be sure that you match up the thin set to the tile. When it comes to mixing the thin set, we like to mix it to about the consistency of pancake batter. On the back of the bag, it'll give you the ratios of how much water and thin set to mix together to get that consistency. It's finally time to start spreading that thin set and laying the tile. And it all starts right up against that chalk line that we popped. You want to be sure not to spread too much of that thin set over the chalk line, otherwise you won't be able to see it and you won't be able to keep your tile straight. Be sure not to spread too much thin set at one time. If it's real hot where you're working, you may only have 10 or 15 minutes to put the tile on top of that thin set, otherwise it'll start to harden or crust over, and once it gets to that point, it's best to just scrape it up and put more thin set down. As you lay the tile, you're going to want to keep a water bucket and sponge handy also, so that you can clean up any thin set that'll get on the tile or in the grout joints. That'll just make it easier when it comes time to start grouting and prepping for the grout. So now we finally got the floor all laid and we let it sit for 24 hours. Now we can get on it and start cleaning out the grout joints. There's not a real simple way to do this. Best thing is just a utility knife and a good sharp blade. That thin set, whenever you're laying the tile, gets into those grout joints and it'll kind of ooze out on top of the tile. So you'll want to cut that out before you can start laying the grout. Once you get it all cut out, you'll run a shop vac over it and suck all the dust out of those joints, and then you'll be ready to start grouting. To spread the grout, we use a grout float held at a 45-degree angle to the floor with a lot of downward force to force that grout into the grout joints. After about 10 minutes, the grout will start to dry and haze over, like you see here. This is the perfect time to call in that friend to start wiping up the grout haze with a damp sponge. It usually takes 2 or 3 cleanings to get the grout and grout haze off of the tile floor. Some things you want to look out for when you're cleaning is to not have your sponge too wet to where you're pumping too much water into the grout. You don't want to push down too hard with the sponge or you'll start pulling the grout out of the tile, and you want to be sure to change your water in your bucket every so often so that you're using clean water and you're actually cleaning the floor and not moving dirty water around.